The information within this podcast is general in nature and should not be construed as advice nor substituted for qualified professional counseling or mental health therapies. If you are genuinely in need of deeper assistance, please seek the advice of qualified professionals.
Yeah, Iain, for old time's sake, how are you?
I'm good. It's been a very full day. It's some days you just have everyone fill your calendar and you didn't know it was going to happen that way, and then that was today. Very full day, and couldn't be happier. It's been fun.
Fulfilling, hopefully.
It's been a variety. I work on another podcast, as you know, Never Say Die, across all channels. It's at Never Say Die, the channel. But I was, we're having a big step there because Janine's 80, 90, we don't even know. But basically, she's always talking about getting fitter and stronger. So we actually got her connected with a friend of mine who's a personal trainer who would love a project like her. So now we're all collaborating and helping each other out. And my goal is to promote him as much as possible. And his goal is to, I guess, get her into powerlifting or something. No, I don't know. But, get her fitter and, bouncing off the walls. Yeah. So that was the start. Then my wife runs a jewelry business, which is margotperrierjewelry.com. And we've sort of been hitting a ceiling of publicity and getting eyes onto the work. People love it when they find it, but at a certain point, you got to engage somebody to get you out there. So when we had that meeting, then I also do psychic work. And there was a woman in crisis, a young model whose whole life is kind of flipping around in a way. And she's in a really dark place. So I got a chance to help her. And I feel like I got through, which was wonderful. Mm-hmm. Then I had my own therapy session with my wife and our couples counselor. And then here we are landing on this one. It's been a big day.
Well, I do want to spend time on your medium work at some point later as well. But yeah, I mean, the last 3 years on this end, since we've left one another on a good note, I've become a grandfather twice over.
Congrats.
Deanna's boys each had children, the first of which was born 6 days after Deanna had an NSTEMI associated with a congenital heart defect that reared its ugly head just as we were entering grandparenthood. So December of 23, she had to go in for emergency open heart surgery. So the vast majority of 2 years have been going into her rehabilitation. We've since moved. We lost mom on Father's Day of 23 as well. We were blessed to be able to be with her in her last hour. And that was a roller coaster of emotion, certainly. So, here we are now. And it was interesting, Deanna had introduced me to her friend who was a young widower. And I had known his story for a while. And at the beginning of this year, there was just this appetite, and Dom and I got together and we had a little chat ahead of time. And I said, I did this thing a few years back, and we'll call it season 1 of Unpacking Grief, where I talked about my own story. And then now here I am kind of rooting through the journey and putting pieces together and being able to impart some of that and wear the host hat. So this time around, I was able to spend a wonderful hour or so with Dom. He was able to tell his story. And I would suggest, if you haven't seen it already, to have a look on the channel, and as well as Dr. Lisa Christie, a pivot into a new area of quantum science and noetics and neuroplasticity, which prompted a lot of introspection. And where we landed now is I've been dedicating most of my time into reverse engineering what I will call my own healing journey. And through study and research, I come to recognize over time that there are pillars that scientists and doctors have pointed to in terms of resilience, somatic moving, which in our episodes we talked about. There were 3 days for 2 hours at a time. I would just sway and chant. And what I didn't know at the time, that I was resetting my nervous system after the traumatic events of losing Zachary. So that was one point of therapeutic, if you will. Another was just having purpose. And, certainly the themes of folks, especially in the suicide, world, parents and friends of folks who have been lost to suicide, it seems, one of their primary go-tos is to keep that life and name up and going. So they set up tributes for suicide awareness. So purpose for charitable events and keeping Zach's name out there. And I started to notice a trend. And with that trend, I said, wow, if I could really articulate what I've done over the past 4 years and even the time leading up to that, because I also learned that where I was when the rupture or the impact came, how I was set emotionally, spiritually, and all those aspects really was the beginning and of a resilience and being able to take that first step in a world where I no longer had my son. That being said, we looked at different tools, and I was researching quantum science, and I come up with understanding that our discussions and the podcast sessions early on were also talk therapy for me. And that is also a big part of where scientists and doctors see people with deep, deep grief being able to find their footing in that therapeutic atmosphere of talk. And as we've shown, that can come in many forms, whether it's your bestie, every Saturday night at 11 o'clock if you need, or if sometimes, require it 4 a.m, whenever that hits, and you have that person there available to you, or if it's more formal, and where we recommend if you need, you seek out professional consult and guidance. And there's plenty of assistance out there as well to talk through your grief and how you are feeling in a certain moment.
Yeah. I think, for anyone stumbling onto a podcast like this, if they happen to land here, the first question I think a lot of people ask is like, I don't even think they know that they're asking it, but the concept is, what the hell am I going through? It's something that's thrust onto you through some random event, and you don't choose it, and you're just left to deal with it. And it's all encompassing, and it's ripping the very energy out of your own core, out of your energy system, out of your physical system. And it's, I say to people within my medium work with grief, in that quantum mechanical, if you think of what an aura is, it's energy. And if you think about quantum entanglement, what is entanglement but connecting our auras? That's why when one person on the other side of the planet thinks about another, they call each other at the same time, or they pick up the phone when the other person's calling, because we have that quantum entanglement. We communicate through those connections of light. So when somebody's spirit is gone from the body and it's going back to wherever it is, like I have this picture that was shown to me by the guides once where they showed literal tendrils of light being pulled out of each other. And when you think of the grief pain, like that's exactly what I've ever felt in grief, is it feels like something's being ripped out of your stomach, probably to return to somewhere else, but it's that fusion of your own energy with any other creature or human or loved one that just, there's no pain like it. And for a lot of people, talking therapy absolutely was a help for you, and I saw that. But some people, they don't want to talk. They don't know how to get there. They don't know what the methodology of what the next step is. And I think this podcast that you've created, and I'm very grateful to have been a part of that starting journey. I've seen you transform energetically since we used to do those first episodes. I wonder now, if you look back and if you see yourself more clearly in those times through watching those episodes again, do you see that you were in a place that you didn't recognize at the time? Or do you feel like you're in the same place or a new place?
So it's interesting that it's simultaneous. And from a quantum standpoint, and I'm glad you talked about that, it seems like quantum and AI just dominates the landscape of discussion in a lot of circles. It's applicable everywhere. And with regard to dialogue, one of the biggest things after coming to realize that our talk therapy was key to me was also the aspect of, from a mediumship standpoint, and those mystical experiences we have that we talked about in those episodes that are undeniable in their magic and support of us from the other side. And to promote not just dialogue, but having that both bridge and build a lattice is from a communication standpoint, is developing a quantum healing glossary. It's 20 words that I felt, with an added description and some illustration of these scenarios that I have gone through, that I've heard others have gone through, and I'm sure listeners may find that it resonates with them, but it never had a name. You would have an experience and you would have to go into great detail, and if you were vulnerable enough to do so, recant this entire story in the hopes that who's listening to you will understand. But applying the language and creating a lexicon around grief healing, my hope is that it promotes community, it promotes dialogue. Now, when one person has this thing, and in the same way we realize that we are connected through those threads across the world, I truly believe that the momentum and this same healing is achievable and is going on. And with that, with each healed person, I've also been able to reframe from that person I was, and the language that I had used, what was known to me at the time. But after introspection and looking forward, I always struggled with the concept of healing after I lost Zach. How is that possible? And it's also hard for an audience or a bereaved parent or someone else to apply that to their own loss and find meaning in it without, in some cases, having to step away and not getting the full benefit of just listening.
I will be honest. It was always amazing to me how high functioning you seemed through what you'd gone through. For me, I found myself thinking, is he processing it? This has got to be more painful than what I'm looking at. He was your mini-me. He was your best friend in a lot of ways. And, I kept experiencing this like expectation in myself. And I'm like, is the grief going to show itself this episode? And I'd have that expectation. And when it didn't, I thought, is he holding it in? Because you've never really shown it to be a visual thing. I know it's in there. I know it's happening in you, but you've just always come across so together. How has that been for you as an experience?
It's a fascinating call out to put myself back as you say this in those sessions and have you realize that that's what you're thinking. And you were right to think that. Those were times where in the talk therapy I was processing as I go along, but being able to characterize the grief, because it's not linear, neither is the healing. They're not the 5 steps that are well documented and talked about in the medical field. I'm not saying they aren't useful, but in a lot of cases, they're not practical. And there are these oscillations that I've come to recognize. And that is where I think resilience is always available to us. And when you see me and I'm not doing that thing, some might think I ought to be doing, or might think, well, it's coming. These are the oscillations of resilience. They aren't absent of Zach or his love or his energy. They integrate it. And I fully integrated his loss and his energy into my daily life. And the goal being that I can move with purpose. I can move lighter in this world. And having come to terms even early on, as hard as it was, that this was his story. This was his contract. And this is mine. So, and in that period, the relationships that I had, a lot of people checked out.
Yeah. That's one of the things I always say to people I work with is you can really measure your life and its issues because your issues are almost always respondent to expectations. You've always got a problem with how things didn't turn out the way you wanted them to. And if you can honestly track back to what the expectation was, often it's subconscious and it creates problems because we don't face this little thing that is always occurring. And I think it might be egoistic and intellectual, but we're always expecting things to go a certain way. And I've found a lot of success in going, oh, what if I don't expect anything to go anyway? And it's just removed the whole paradigm of disappointment from a huge sector of my life. And I think we can be recipient to that too. People expect to see us resolve issues in a certain way. And when we don't, or we process in a different way than they would say is healthy, they're starting to project those expectations further by saying, well, you're not doing the thing. Why aren't you doing the thing? You're supposed to do the thing. It's healthy for you, as if they're inside what's right for you,
And that's another thing, being able to balance the correctness of sharing my story with the understanding that it would find the people it was meant to find. And to be able to look back even now at those early episodes and then follow a trajectory, I hope it is an example to others that there is a different way if they are suffering through any sort of grief to approach it, and that it's a choice. It's a choice from the first day I had to wake up and go downstairs where Zach was no longer present, and so bringing and looking at all those emotions again brought to form. Again, these tools form I coined as a focus and orientation. Resilience it's been the biggest find in this journey, to be able to rightfully frame the feelings and the explanation for what others see from the outside, whether or not it coincides with the inner turmoil. I mean, when you see me, if I'm at peace, I'm at peace. The emotion is there when it's evident. Again, it's the oscillating aspect of things. And then memory is those aspects of focusing on what my life will be going forward. And then we're going backward, the orientation, right? Is my plan to move forward? Is my plan to not move at all? And resilience is the, can I get up today as easily as I got up yesterday? And if I don't, can I find it within myself to not take that as a sign that I'm spiraling? Or
that's the thing with expectation is the more I've looked into my own and others, the more you go, wow, this is really insidious. It's everywhere. Because, if I said, hey, I've got something for you, and I reached into my pocket, before I bring it out, your mind's already created 3 or 4 scenarios for what's coming out of that pocket. And expectation is, that exact moment to every little thing. We're always got this little part of our brain that's anticipating what's coming next to keep us safe. And I think when it comes to grief, expectation is one of the biggest resistance points, roadblocks, speed bumps. If you expect to go through it in a certain way, you're going to be disappointed. And I think that's true for everyone, because there's few other experiences in life that are as powerless as grief.
To look at other losses of my life and where I was, all of these call into play. My dad was my biggest first karmic loss. And I find it odd as well. And maybe you could talk about the fact that part of my astrology was tied to being that person who I was there when my dad passed away, and I was at my mom's side when she passed away, and I was with Zach. He was with me when he passed away as well, and that just seemed to be tied into my story. So that experience was a test run in a sense, and I looked at how I was relating to the grief associated with losing my dad with a critical eye, because I understood why I wasn't doing the things that others might want me or expect me to do. But I didn't like the robotic nature, being there to greet the family and friends who had come to his funeral to pay their respects. And for us, it was just this robotic, endless, for the time we were there, the shaking of the hand and the words that just were just empty. It was just to greet them and then hurry them along so I could get through my day. And now that helped me to recognize that there's nothing you can attribute to that other than survival. Not survival in a dire sense, but survival in the oscillating sense that we have to survive every day. We have to survive some small things. We have to survive some bigger things. We're not at all, but it is a mindset that I think that in our society, we have been desensitized to death in a way that would allow people to find healing and a different path. But if there was a curriculum, or if there was ever a call for a curriculum or a desire, I certainly would want to be front and center and starting to write that, to encourage folks to find their healing wherever possible.
When it comes to clear and present dangers like a lion confronting you on the Serengeti, or a person with a weapon, we're very clear about the fight, flight, fawn and freeze response. Went from fight and flight to now there's 4 of them, and they all serve a purpose in those sorts of situations, but we don't really have the same metric for how people are predisposed to face grief. Like someone like you, I'm sure people close to you see the tears, but outwardly facing, you seem like you've taken it in your stride and you've been pretty strong through it. That's one style. There's other people who collapse. There's other people who collapse and don't get up. There's different ways of approaching it. And I feel like if there were more a clear understanding of your grieving style or tendency, there's a real opportunity there if this is the work that you're moving towards, to really help categorize what are those styles, because it's like a instruction manual for those tough times that I think a lot of people, even if it was just a PDF, it'd be useful. Those sorts of resources are, at least for me, people like me, it's very helpful for me to understand my brain, my tendencies, So just a
Definitely.
thought.
And going back to the final M of form and memory, that is what enabled me to, reframe the healing grief aspect. I've integrated the grief into my daily life, and the memory of the love is what carries, me through each day. It's not so much the spin the wheel, but now the purpose, these all become new, and they're all again oscillating in that grief wave form. The moments that come up where just Zach's ringtone on my phone was from Knight Rider. It was the Kit car, and his text tone was Kit with his signature tone. So it obviously had been a while since I had heard it, and we were watching TV one night, and out of nowhere, it's a commercial with a Knight Rider sound. And as good as it was to hear, I've heard things before that were familiar and comfortable and comforting, but it hit in a way. It was like a few minutes later, I cried it out, and those things are okay. And it's and they're not; these aren't setbacks. Folks could look at their journey and consider these as setbacks. It's all natural. These are oscillations. You are managing every moment to moment, and you may not be fully mentally buried in the uck, if you will, of that severe grief. But even in its place, you're working it.
I see
or
that a
you're
lot
taming
in
it.
yeah. I see that a lot in the people I work with. I don't like to call it psychic. It's in the realm, but it's more of a medium channeling work that I do. And people are frequently approaching healing and what they're going through from a really binary perspective. And that's just not realistic. It's the spectral, like you said. There's the oscillation of feeling good some days, not feeling good. And as far as I've learned from the people like Scott, from the Weekly Transit, who's friends with both of us, frequently how you're feeling has nothing to do with you. It's astrological influence. Sometimes it's the pollen in the air because of the low-flying cloud. Sometimes it's something else. You crick your neck. To expect that you should feel good every day, one, is unrealistic. And that's in normal life, let alone through grief. So you before talked about resilience, and I think the resilience is understanding there's no metric, there's no right or wrong. We live in this binary world where, whether it's politically on social media or anything, everyone's trying to push what's right. There's no right. The only determinant of right is your own opinion. We can talk about something factual like oxygen having two oxygen molecules or whatever they're called. Yes. O2, bingo, science, fact, right? We can say that's fixed. Yep, we can all agree on that. But with most other things, it's relativism, it's perspective, it's opinion, it's belief. And take that back to the quantum as well. It's also the fact that the quantum uncertainty principle proves that the expectation of the observer determines outcome. They've run that test tens of thousands of times at this point. So it's proving the manifestation quotient. So when it comes to your own healing, the only reason that you're disappointed that you're not doing better is your expectation that you should be. Shift your expectation. Be where you are.
It's an interesting analogy I just have come up with. I spent a lot of my career with in boxes, and we order a ton. We order a ton from Amazon at times, and I noticed just the packaging has become so intricate that the designers of certain items create it such that it packs perfectly into the smallest dimensioned box. And I equate that to the size or the shape, if it were that way, of grief. You need so many different boxes to be able to contain it, and for everyone to be able to look at it from a different perspective and find a box for themselves is again, I'm building bridges, I'm connecting dots wherever I can. And if somebody comes along and picks up a thread that leads them to a place where things are easier or lighter, that's the most I could ask. And on the quantum aspect, from visualization exercises, I realized that one powerful example was in our old house in the backyard, our fire pit. And just one night there were 6 chairs just lying in a circle. We didn't have 6 guests. I was maybe my OCD at the time. And Deanna and I were talking, and Dad had been present in my mind. And, certainly mom had passed not too long before. I envisioned all 6 of us sitting outside by the fire, and to the detail where mom would have gone upstairs first. She would have excused herself. She would have given us all kisses of goodnight, Zach, and she would have went to bed. And probably not long after, Anna would have excused herself. Zach, Destiny would have gone on their way. And I could imagine that my dad and I, fitting enough, would have been, the last 2 sitting out there. And, I had a medium talk to me about how he would have loved to garden and how Deanna's gardening, her earth sign of Capricorn and her love of plants and her skill in tending to them, where he would be alongside. And how great is that for a son to be able to visualize that which we weren't blessed to see? That visualization and integrating Zach into such a simple setting was now a new memory, right? So now I reframed it, and it's just a visualization. It's something I saw in that moment. But that became a basis for quantum temporal overlap model, where these are really just the intersections of past, present. It's just right now, everything overlapped, where Zach's present, dad, mom, with me now in that moment, and explaining the oscillation where everyone can be present and there can be a peaceful picture of love rather than despair.
Yeah.
And the memory is preserved, and simultaneously recognizing the expectation that they will show up is no longer there. And that's akin to the attachment and detachment.
I can't help but wonder if you're actually doing interdimensional work here without realizing it. The infinite timeline potential theory, shall we say, is exactly what you're talking about. If we talk about manifestation, you imagine something and then you might invent that thing and it might come into reality. It started as a thought. So the thought definitely becomes the reality, right? And what I'm saying is, like, when you're creating these projections of a chosen memory, you're creating them in an imagined space. Just like 2 nights ago, I had a dream. That dream was real. I came out of it and I was like, no, like, I've had dreams before. That wasn't a dream. I was in a space and time that was not this space and time. And you walk out and you're like, I know it was a dream, but that one wasn't a dream. And here and there, we start to experience these like realities that are non-physical. And I think they really tie into what exists outside of the human body. We don't understand it because we have such a limited concept of perception. And even if it was explained to us, I'm not sure the brain could capacitate the kind of interdimensional infinity we're dealing with. But what you're doing when you do this is absolutely creation. And I believe from my work, when you do these sorts of exercises, you're actually inviting them into that space. So as much as it might feel imaginary, I would put money down that those spirits that you were picturing were a part of that in a space and time that's non-physical. And that's why it sounds like it forms as such a core new memory, because they're like, you're doing it. We'll help with this one. This is a good thing to be playing with energetically. I always have felt you've got some sort of connection to the psychic. I've tapped into it with the way you say things and the way we relate here and there. And I remember you saying you don't know what it is, but you feel like there's something. And I'm wondering if it's in this realm, because you've spoken about this sort of stuff multiple times.
I realized that I was broken open with Zach, and I recognized the gifts that I didn't know I had that allowed me to commune with his energy. And for all those Star Wars and sci-fi buffs, what do you think they were talking about? But in any event, yes, it was a process of, again, intuition, knowing that it's there, inviting, asking for help in developing the gifts, whatever they are. And I have a sense from a communication standpoint, it's very clear that I've gotten more through numbers and random words. Messages come through because somehow they know I go right to gematria. And it's quite amazing how often there's a very specific little channeled messages. So I have been paying attention. There's also, it's another interesting phenomenon you may be able to speak to more, but there's been these free cognition scenarios is the best way I can describe it. For example, I will hear something like FedEx truck, the actual FedEx truck, the word, but that being made as a signal, like, wait, why am I supposed to pay attention to a FedEx truck? And then within the span of an hour, I hear a noise outside. and it's a FedEx truck and he's backing up into my driveway and he's pulling away. How did I access that? What was the purpose of? Was it purposeful? Not everything that we access has a dire purpose. That's where discernment comes into play as well. And you could speak to this as a medium.
What I'm hearing is the biggest. If someone was to say, "How do you do what you do?" Do you know what the biggest thing I could say is the ingredient of choice that tops out all others with doing psychic work of any description? It's trust. It's trust that what you've heard is what you've heard. Most people, and I've worked with people who don't say that they've got this gift, and I say, no, everyone's got this gift. I say, who had this scenario, and they go, yeah, and then I say, all right, what happens next? Or I'll ask them a question of their heart, and it always answers instantly. And I'll say, I saw you receive the answer. I felt you received the answer, but you're not trusting it. Why are you not trusting it? And they're like, oh, I wasn't sure if it was my brain. That's literally the same response that I get from almost every person is they mistake thoughts for them making it up, or they mistake, not thoughts. Thoughts is the wrong word, because for me, when you get that guidance, it comes through as a really quiet whisper. And you hear it, but you don't know if you heard it. And then once you hear that you heard it, you go, I don't know if I heard that. Was that me? Was I thinking it? Don't make it up. You end up spiraling, and the ego is like kind of driving that insanity. You know, if you can just go into that quiet space and like when you hear that thing, I've learned to say, thank you, because I've gone even deeper to the point where I'm like, there's not a thought I think that is mine. Every single thought that I think is likely a suggestion from my team. I'm just the one who gets to observe it and choose. I'm the one with the body and the physical experience. Good idea, bad idea. And then I go to discern, is it ego? Is it intuition? Is it guidance? Was it a dark entity whispering in the ear? Because that still happens. You know, people talk about intrusive thoughts. That's disembodied dark energies being like, push the person, push them. You know, these kinds of suggestions that we think are thoughts, and we think that they're our own because we're so brain trained into thinking that material Newtonian science is the only thing that exists, which means that everything I hear in my head is mine. You know, if you let go of that, now you're in a shop full of thoughts. You can see them all. I can attend to them all. Don't have to actually deal with them all. That one's yuck. Look at that one. You know, you change the way you relate to thought, and you actually start to integrate intuition more easily because it starts to have a similarity, but yet a distinct difference from all those other offerings, you know. And the intuitive thoughts, I think when you deal with it in that way, where you're in the shop of thoughts, choosing, you can choose which thought or line of thought that you go on, because there's a lot of lines of thought that are not healthy. A lot of us go down those spirals, and then how do you get out? Now you're in that corridor of thought, right? But if you stay out here where the thoughts are all opportunity, you know, you can really pick and choose what you're thinking. And that's where intuition comes through for me as well, is when I stay out of any corridor where I don't go down any rabbit holes too much. Intuition sounds different, but it takes the trust. It takes the trust to go, oh no, that one wasn't me. And I trust them better than I trust myself. So when I hear those little things like FedEx truck, maybe for you, it's just the trust building stage, but it is absolutely, for me, it's the paramount stage, because if you're still in distrust of hearing intuition, then you're not going to take it. Not 100% of the time.
And it's a safety mechanism as well. Like redirects. My redirects that happened around the time of Zach's passing, the trip that was supposed to be to Amsterdam, that I ended up after what would have been the third cancellation of a flight and reschedule. I just stayed stateside and went to Florida. And I'm convinced had I gone out of the country, I wouldn't have made it back due to COVID, because literally it was less than 48 hours that I had to spend with Zach. Before he died. That's another paradigm shift for me. I know that I integrated the word past, Zach's passing, everything's, you know, again, it's sort of that robotic, you know, dictation and habit. Only recently have I found it possible. Not that it was a denial aspect, it was just a resistance point, where saying in a way where other people also, it's not really, I don't want to say honest or legitimate if I don't use that word for others, but it is an indication of, you know, it's of reality.
It's a conscious choice.
Yeah.
Yeah. I always noticed that you said that, and I thought, I get it. For me, I was like, I wouldn't want to say the D word. You know, I feel like there's a finality there that once you know about the spirit realm, like it's just not true to start with, but two, it just feels like it's a choice to use a word that disconnects from someone who's still relatively accessible, you know, just through those intuitive channels. Beginning of this session, I was sitting here looking at you and I don't remember what I was thinking. And then it's like the best metaphor I can show is like, imagine that there's a light here, but the rest is dark over there. And I see Zach's face come through it, and he's like, and you know what he said? He was like, hey, bro. If you go back and play this, you'll see me at the beginning. Like, I just kind of started chuckling because I was like, okay, he's in the house. Yeah, well, I feel like he had a lot to do with connecting us. The more I look back, the journey of this, just to let the audience in a little bit, like I remember being full steam ahead, like, yeah, let's do a podcast. And like, my energy wasn't in the place that I think you were at, because you weren't really giving those indications of where you were at, because you're so together seeming on the outside. And then, it got to a point where you're like, I need a minute. And I was like, okay, no worries. We took a minute, and it's been 3 years, 2 years or whatever. And, I learned a lot through that. I learned a lot about myself and my energy and relating and pushing. And you remember how many ideas I had. Oh, you can do this, and you can be this, and you can be that. And you're like, whoa, pump brakes. And like seeing you come back, so strong with this podcast, and like looking at how you're managing, the materials that you're sending before we get on these calls. Like, I'm really freaking proud of you, man. Like, I'm serious. Like, I was like, touche. He's got this. He's got the fucking horse, and he's Billy cutting down the road, and it's amazing to see that. So kudos.
You've helped me to birth something wonderful, and in our initial project.
This is wonderful. Yeah.
And being able to have open dialogue, to have vulnerable, honest dialogue that normal people can listen to, that there's something for everyone in these conversations, that they could be able to walk away with a new perspective. And if they never came back, that's fine. I mean, however many hours of content are out there is irrelevant. It's literally a beacon. Deanna and I took a trip to Sedona prior to Mom's passing. And when we were there, we went to Boynton Canyon, and we had a tour that was handled by a local native, Rogelio. Fascinating guy. We spent 3 hours with
exactly who you're talking about.
Okay. Yeah. You got to tell me Aurelio stories, but
he's met on so many documentaries. He's
very knowledgeable. And we were blessed to spend time with him, and he took us into the hills for the sunset. But prior to that, he drove us onto the grounds of Boynton Canyon. Deanna and I both laid on the ground. He performed a ceremonial with the drum over top of us, and he pounded that drum over our chest. And when I tell you, you can feel the reverberations. And he had a visual exercise, and he pointed up to the mountain, and there was a door. And whether or not that was an entrance to safety thousands of years ago when there was a flood, he explained to us that where we stood on the edge, there was actually footprints and handprints of an Indian child that was being taken by the water. And he said, I want you to go into this chamber, and there's a gift in there. That's all he said. And what I came away from it knowing, it was an owl. I saw an owl. And what it turned into is actually a wood carved owl. And maybe I'll find a picture to put on the podcast, but an owl that represents my mother and that symbolism. And that owl also comes to me now when I need it, as does the lighthouse. And the lighthouse, as Mom was also, on her prayer card, is symbolic of her in this sense that she is the beacon, and she has been a beacon. And I too want this to be a beacon. You could be in a plane, you could be in a boat, you could be walking the shoreline, you can be miles away, but the beacon is there, and it's there for a reason. Waxing poetic on a Friday night. Yeah. But the mediumship, I was in the back of a taxi once as well, and out of nowhere, I started reading not a taxi, the Uber driver. The other way around, I flipped the script on your novel idea. And yes, I was out to dinner. It was a business thing. I'm sure I had a cocktail or two. And maybe that's what allowed it to come through. But when I tell you, when I read her, and I was very careful, I was dead on. And I'm sure she left, we left parted ways very jovial. There was love there, because what we had just gone through in those minutes was very intimate, but also there was a release.
Yeah.
And there was a comfort that abounded, not just, that I felt. Spirit is speaking through me. There was a message that needed delivered.
Mm-hmm.
And on that night, it was me. And maybe I was in a place in my life where I was like, wow, you can't find somebody else. I'm not the guy for this. This is not me. I'm living the 9 to 5. I'm working on a college degree. I'm, raising Zach and, trying to keep a house together. I mean, I was rebuilding my life in that stage of ego. And here I am called upon to deliver a message. And so I stepped into it and I trusted, and it was a big lesson.
It is a big lesson. And I will say that if it's something that, you'll only receive what you welcome. If it's something you want in your life, you need to make space and make that conscious. And, if it's for you, it'll come. For me, it was a very conscious point that I was like, all right, I think I've got something here and I need to share this. And just earlier today with a couples therapist, we were talking about hypnotherapy. And I think I'm actually going to be moving towards, studying hypnotherapy. With the medium work, I think there's a unique opportunity there. I never studied to be a therapist, but I did work with therapists, filming a lot of their sessions for certain uses that therapists need to film certain sessions. I was just doing the videography, and I ended up connecting with these people, and they were like, why aren't you a therapist? And I was like, I don't know. And they gave me all of the details for how to become one. And I looked at the amount of years you have to study, and I was like, oh, come on, man, 10 years plus, really? So I never really moved towards it, but I find that that's kind of somewhat the work that I do through this medium work, because there's times where, there's my information that will come through just from the things I've learned in life. There's times where the Spirit's talking through. There's times where I'm getting images. It's this really multimodal, very careful to stay in my lane, very careful to not give people advice in a way that could, be dangerous for them. Certain things like today, dealing with a woman who's, medicated. I said, like, if you're going to deal with those medications and get off of them, like, you need support. You need to work with a medical therapist and have that support. You don't just pull the pins on things that are keeping you sane and good. So outside of those safety parameters, it really is using everything that's available to me to just show up for people. And the biggest challenge is I've always had a desire to help people, but I've learned that I have to actually not come from that place. I have to be the person that people ask. I can't be the person who suggests that they need help. So it's been a bit of a lesson for me, understanding that energy, that compulsion to help, it's a beacon. I shouldn't be thrusting it. I should be a beacon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's interesting too, as well, in the themes of healing. And if that, certainly not if, I've recognized in my life that, having abandoned, literally, I've lived several lives in this incarnation, several different stories of ego. And the vast majority of that past is, for me, reconciled. And that ego death is a real thing for me. I refer to my history often because that's the only thing that, keeps me cohesive in this
book is made of its pages, my friend. Well, the story's still writing itself, really. So,
yeah.
I mean, I feel the desire to sort of mirror you back. The journey that I've seen you on in the time that we've been friends and working on this project, I've seen you be incredibly strong, flying out of the gates with the podcast. And then when we took a break, I saw some vulnerability as you're going through challenges, and seeing you come back now with this new place that doesn't fit into either of those categories. You're very steady, measured. It seems like you've figured some things out and it's working, and you're just enjoying the process is how it reads.
Yes.
So
back to I guess the healing aspect was not just from my story and my purpose, but also healing, energetic healing, as you endeavor to expand and open more gifts of yours, or better be able to integrate them and practice them. The energetic healing been available to me. I've used it. And to the degree that, you don't need to, even though there's empathy, as empaths, that's the slippery slope that, it sounds like you find yourself in. That compulsion to help. We neither of us suffer from, bystanders complex. We're always ready to jump in. And if there's something, we're jumping in and we're getting involved.
Did you read that book, Let Them?
It's
chasing you, isn't it?
It might be a different demographic. Yeah. So there's messages that come through, and there's speakers that come through, and some that miss the mark. And while she has found a great following, she's been a great help to my nephew. But I've also come to find that these are not permanent relationships. They're things that, there's no expectation of permanency, that this motivational speaker will always speak the frequency that that you need. But I think that she has something that a lot of people can resonate with, and that she has a therapeutic effect, even though it's sometimes harsh or heavy-handed. Some might say it's just an attribute. She's building different boxes for life problems in a different scope, dealing with grief and death, and she's dealing with grief and life. How do I take my life, and as some would say, I don't know how to make good decisions. I keep making horrible decisions. And then you guilt yourself, like, why am I making these decisions? I'm a horrible person because I don't make good decisions. And the next thing you know, you make yourself your worst enemy. And that's no way to live. The, self-esteem and coming from someone who's didn't have much of it growing up. And my dad's relationship impaired a lot of that because I believed the things that I had been told. So self-esteem and in a dysfunctional, chaotic home, other recipe for the set of challenges, designed for me. That was my karma in the house and home, and I'm a Cancer. So the emphasis and the impact of that on my story is probably much greater than someone who has a different astrological frequency. But, those things were all there for me, and proving grounds that everywhere it's, Zach's saying, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. And that's what I had said to him, and that's what he had returned to me. And if we really truly think and are honest with ourselves, I think you would agree that even in the worst, we were always exactly where we were supposed to be.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a yes, but it goes so much deeper, because for me, the deep, deep rabbit hole I've gone through, I'm like, is the physical even real? So when we talk about the here that we're supposed to be at, where is it? Because at a level, all things are derived of the great nothing, which is the everything, which is the nothing, which is the everything. That's the paradox of reality, is all things exist. They've all come from a nothing. And that's the yin yang. It's the paradox of reality, is that, the infinite timeline theory I talked about before, or what you might call the multiverse. Science has basically unequivocally proven it. There's a guy, Max Tegmark, The Mathematical Universe, the book, and he's like, checks out, you can use science. It has to be real. It just mathematically, scientifically has to be real, looking at all of the science. Which I think is that thing that I was saying before about the brain, is we can't comprehend what infinity looks like. If you picture a million golf balls and then you picture a million or a million, like there's a certain point where your brain can't even conceive of how many that looks like. And then it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And that's what infinity is. So every choice that we make within that model means that there's a new physicalized reality existing out there somewhere, which makes no sense to a physical reality. How do you fit this entire earth and universe and another one all of a sudden with every decision? So it shows you that the physical perspective at a level, if we've got these shifting timelines, which sadly science seems to show we have, it just doesn't make sense. So you start to go, well, what is reality? But if it isn't physical, and if it isn't really real, then I'm still definitely where I'm supposed to be.
Well, at a time where our realities are being tested by everything, literally, it's just one of those, even the underpinnings of physics, where things have been agreed upon, whether it's cosmology, and like things are happening in the universe that were once thought to be, well, wait, we have this figured out. What is happening?
Everything's
this
up for
defies.
grabs.
We have 3i Atlas coming through, this interstellar traveler, and it's like, it's fascinating. And there's some folks who think that it's a ship, and there's some who it's a comet, clearly.
I think last time you and I were really like hanging out lots, you probably would have remembered me as a guy who's like, no, I know what's going on. Things are like this. Since then, I am in such a place of like, people say, oh, it's a spaceship, oh, it's an asteroid. I'm like, great, both can be true. Quantum. You know what? Let's see which timeline I end up on. You just choose positive. And like, I've actually started to check out of social media. There was the whole scroll thing. We keep ourselves abreast of what's happening in the world by scrolling. And, that came to a point recently after the whole Charlie Kirk assassination, where just people have become kind of worse in ways than they've been before, which was already sometimes pretty bad through things like COVID. And I feel like we're in ways regressing in that realm. And I'm like, yeah, I'm out. I'm going to just go live in the real world for a minute. So I do think when it comes to your quantum potentials and timelines, like what you focus on is absolutely important. And as that pertains to grief, focusing on healing, whatever that looks like, because, there really is no healing from grief. The person or the pet is not coming back. So when you say healing, having some metric of like, what is it that I hope to achieve? Do I just hope to feel better or function? Giving yourself goals, some sort of metric, and it doesn't mean it's right or wrong, good day, bad day, forget all of that. You set the sail, you set the bearing, and then, the wind blows you around. You just stay on course.
And so long as you reserve yourself to the individual aspect and the unique aspect of grief that it applies to you and you alone.
Yeah.
I find that anyone can find a peaceful place in the absence of a loved one.
Yeah. And on that, my biggest key was acceptance. I think that's really one of the big pillars of grief is acceptance is the place that we don't really want to get to, but it's got healing.
It's one of the key steps. And again, stressing, some folks have not signed that contract to heal. And so to your point, you can't push religion on people. You can't push healing on people. You shouldn't push your mindsets on people. We're unraveling from that on the planet now. And I think that when folks get a taste of individual thinking, healthy, well-formulated thinking, we'll see a sea change in society. I think that a lot of the things where even folks like you or I won't need the 8-year certification from a big, beautiful institution of higher learning that says, life has made me an expert in my grief. I am an expert in my grief. And even though that's just one person, I think that it could hold clues for other people going through similar circumstances. What is the next chapter?
I'm very consciously in the I don't know, and I'm making a friend of the I don't know, and I'm also making a friend of the I don't need to know. So the basis behind manifestation, or what religious people call prayer, is belief. If you don't believe it's going to happen, it's not going to happen. So for me, I set my sail to what my intentions are. And for me, it's just to help people, to be a beacon, to help people wake up if they should so choose, if they need the information that I have, if I can be of service to them. And then the rest of my life is just fun. So the bikes, there's another one down here, there's a motorcycle over there. Like for me, I'm building these YouTube channels around the things that I enjoy, because I realize that if you are a soul that's come here to play, then freaking play, and the healing is in the play. The healing is in the play. It's all it takes is for you to honor yourself enough to do the things you love. But we're in this world where they've told us, get a job, and we've just put the ball ring in and off we go down to slaughter. And I just don't think that's really all we were here to do. I think play is where creativity lies. Play is where healing and learning and understanding and connecting with the planet. Do you ever spin in circles as a kid? When you're a kid in the lawn, you just spin in circles. Do you ever do that one?
I didn't have a lawn. There was a lot of concrete in Southville.
Okay. Well, that was a me thing. But I remember I'd lie down afterwards and I look back on it and I'm like, I wonder if I was tapping into some sort of transcendental exercise. I'd collapse. Yeah. And I'd spin and spin and spin, get so dizzy, and I was barefoot on the grass. And then I jump onto the trampoline and I'd just be bouncing and feeling sick and spinning and seeing things. But that sort of stupidity for no reason other than the experience of the physical reality, feeling gravity, feeling inertia, feeling the grass, feeling your head, feeling the nausea. We're here for those experiences. We're in a human body so we can feel. And through my medium work and through listening to others do their medium work, they all say that the ones who are not in a body, they envy us. They know they shouldn't. It's not a high emotion, but they do. They're all like, oh, I just wish I could drink water and swim. And, here we are on a planet, the opportunity to do all these things, and we're all complaining and bitching and yelling at each other about who's right and how we have to think in certain ways. And it's just go play. Honestly,
yes,
it's that simple.
Play hard.
Yeah. Yeah. And smile more.
Yeah. Definitely.
Play more,
definitely.
Smile more. Yeah.
Definitely. We have to do this again sometime when you,
man, that was a lot of fun.
We'll flow into it.
Yeah.
And I love you like a brother. And again, too, thanks is too small of a word. When we're building a glossary around things that you can't really explain, again, you were the driving force, the gift, you served your purpose and then some, and I got a friend out of it. So
absolutely,
or more than one. I've got countless friends out of it. I just don't get to see them very often.
I love watching this grow, and seeing that you're continuing this brings me great joy, because like you said, as a beacon, there's just so many people who are going to find this. And with the internet, these things live for decades. You never know who you're going to help. people who might be born after we're gone could be watching this.
Yeah. We never know. That's the beauty of it. We just do and go from there. And we'll talk again soon.
Much love, brother.
Have a good night.
Love you.